Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. And it's Salim. And hey guys, can we start? Welcome to the Glasgow JavaScript Meetup. I heard that there was one before, but it's been a while that it didn't happen, so we'll claim it's the first one. Maybe it's not literally, but we'll see. Um, yeah. Like some of you know, the organizers of the meetup and the two people doing the talks today, we volunteer for Code Your Future, which is a school that teaches programming to refugees and asylum seekers in the UK. It's 100% dependent on volunteers, not funded. It's just a group of developers that come every Saturday to teach programming. It's been in London since October. We already had a cohort graduating. And so asylum seekers, they're still in the process. They don't have the paperwork to work, but the refugees do. And we had, for all the graduates that are eligible to work in London got jobs. The last one of them got a job in Financial Times, and that's literally just him going applying by himself, no favors, nothing, and he's good enough, proving that he's good enough as a developer. The same project was in Holland, and also they had very good ratio of people getting work. And we're hoping the same will be in Scotland. So, like I said, like here, there are at least who are the mentors who volunteer for Code Your Future here. So these are some of them. They volunteer every Saturday. And we need more mentors. That's the core of what we do, that people who are willing to give up some of their time to teach and to help others. And we need more of this. That affects the quality of the course and teaching and so on. And it's not just face-to-face on Saturdays. It can be, we have online help. There's a Slack channel. There is pull request reviews. There are many things that you could help with. The stack is JavaScript. We just finished the Node.js module. We're starting React. So it's also a good way to learn. Like a lot of the mentors didn't know Node, and they joined, and they helped others, and also they learned in the process. So it's a good way to learn as well. So the classes are at Kenning Park Complex every Saturday. There are some flyers here about the project, so hopefully some of you want to be involved. And if you can contact us and follow us and so on. Anything you want to add? Yeah. There are some of the students as well, very good developers, by the way. And does it help to have more mentors? Yeah.
Ask for everyone who can give us a little bit of his time, because it's so helpful. I mean, it's all voluntary, and we really need them. You know, if you are studying by yourself and you do all kind of mistakes and then you give up, you need someone to push you until you come on study, because you go work. It's like proper college. Most people doesn't learn outside of the college, most of us, and basically we are too. So we need also our English languages. I mean, I know I can speak, but most of us, like, we are really, it's a barrier. So like we can, if an English speaker is reading a documentation about a language or something, he can understand it, he can teach himself by himself. But we are not good enough to understand any documentation. We are not enough even, to understand, some this terminologies that are so hard even for English speakers themselves. So we just need that push, like the beginning, and then we can just start after it. And hopefully our course is going to end soon. So yeah, that's out of the topic. But our course is going to end in 2 months, and most of us can't work. We are asylum seekers, so we can't work. We can't do so many things. We just
So it's
receive
coding, yeah. Yeah.
£5 a day. That's like my transportation to come here. That's my daily allowance.
Mm.
So I would be so happy if someone can, give us an opportunity even to volunteer, even to do free projects for him, even to do anything for him. Just not because we can't, work, but it will be helpful for us even to develop our own skills. And if someone is like good enough, he can also teach us or help us or tell us do this, and then he review our code and he tell us it's better to do it this way. So it's always helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, for anyone to to join and help us. That's my speech.
He's the official speaker. Yeah. So yeah, it's just to know that special asylum seekers, there are like the people who are seeking asylum, and it's people escaping prosecution for sexuality, for wars, for political reasons, all kind of reasons. And it's a very volatile situation, and they still choose to be there. We have 12 students, despite all of these circumstances, every Saturday they show up and they want to learn coding. So it's a good project. Hopefully, a few of you will be involved. Yeah, we can get to the talks normally. So the same group, we did React Edinburgh, and we start normally with introduction, but we will not do introduction for all of us, but if anyone is looking for a job or looking for people to hire, at least you can announce that now. Fandu?
Hello, I work for Fandu here. We are looking for front-end developers. As far as I know, of course, we also other developers. We have offices in Edinburgh and Glasgow, also New York, although that's probably a bit too far for you. And yeah, we're looking for a lot of front-end developers. So if you're interested, check it out. Ask me. We're really nice people, like wonderful human beings. And
Anyone else?
Like I'm looking for a job because like I'm not in the developer industry yet because I'm an accountant, but I want to change careers. So I'm self-taught, learning to code. Like I'm looking for a job, so I don't know. Like, I'll talk to you later.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other people? Are you? No. Yeah. Cool. So this is our Twitter handle, Glasgow_JS. You can follow us, and we'll start. We have 2 talks. Mine is the first one, so we'll start with that. This is not very easy. Yeah, I'll just sit down. So the first talk is about React Native. How many people have done React Native here? Okay, cool. So this is a kind of introductory talk, and it will concentrate on styling, layout, and themes in React Native. It's more aimed towards people who made the switch from React to React Native, but hopefully it will be accessible to everyone. So the first thing is, why React? Why React Native? For me personally, I started working with React Native beginning of this year. Before that, I had experience with Cordova PhoneGap and never with native. And we were building an application with a friend, and the decision was, yeah, which way to go. And native was not an option. We were not going to learn for a specific, start learning from scratch. We wanted to use the skills that we know. I'd done Cordova before, but I've been doing React, and it was interesting to just check if it try to learn in the process and do the project in a new technology. And we didn't regret it. We started with React Native, and it's a major boost compared to Cordova. So architecture is very different. That Cordova is a web view, and your application lives in that web view. So like a website that's living web view, so you're constrained with web view even if you have access to some native features. While in React Native, it's you have a bridge, and then your React Native controls maps to to native controls, whether on iOS or on Android. So it's immediately, performance-wise, it's much better. And it's not one of these theoretical performance stuff like, don't know, Fiber is whatever more faster than React or so on. It's something that you feel straight away, that you spend a lot of time with Cordova, especially before Ionic, to just make it feel and act like a native application. And it's really hard to do that. While you get that pretty much straight away with React Native. The development experience was amazing, that you can have debugging very easily. You can connect to your emulator. This is on the right is a mobile simulator, and you can easily debug and so on. Very nice experience for development. It has great CLI that you can start your applications and so on. ES6 out of the box. It looks native, and code push, which we'll come back to. And then there are the bits that were confusing, especially if you're coming from React. Reactor Redux, if you don't know Reactor Redux, it will be confusing, obviously. But styling and layout is one thing that's confusing when you're doing the jump. And that will be the focus of this talk, how to do styling and layout and theming in React Native. Routing as well is and boilerplate, but boilerplates, but we'll come back to that at another talk, hopefully. To get started, when I did a similar talk in April, and the way I set up the application was using React Native. That's the default way. So it's a CLI that you install. You can say React Native in it, a new application, and you get a new application. Since then, Create React Native App, CRNA, has become quite popular and mature. And also Expo, which is probably the easiest way to get started. It has this kind of tool, like CodePen for React Native. You can download the Expo app, and if you just scan this code, you can start immediately coding, and you will get hot reloading on your mobile app, and you can start building with that, and at the end you can export it to XD, which allows you to continue locally if you want and build that. But this is a very easy, quick way of getting started with React Native. Create CRNA and Expo, they both use Expo SDK, which is so with React Native, if you use the default CLI, you get access to native modules. You can link native modules, and with Expo, it has an SDK. It has access to most of the things that you would need, but similar to Create React App, if you want to do anything custom, you'll have to eject and start from scratch. But Create React Native makes it quite easy to just get started. If you install it with npm install Create React Native App. I have it installed already, and then you can just say Create React Native App Demo or something else, and you will get an app up and running straight away. And it's all you need to run it, then just yarn run Android or iOS, and you can have it running on a device simulator. or you can scan this QR code and you can develop and you get hot reloading immediately on your mobile. So it's very quick to get started. So these are the ways, typical ways to get started with React Native. And then once you have an application, you have it up and running. This is now, like I said, this is I'm running on the emulator for Android, but to run it is just, the command is just yarn run Android. And I have this, it's running as an app. So the first thing is, the styling in React is a bit different, is a bit, I have a checklist here, is a bit different from what we used to, probably most of us, and it was a bit of a shock at the beginning. So the way to style, if I want to style this, will be to give it an object, basically, and I can say color red, and this styles the text to red in this case. So it's a subset of kind of CSS, but not really. It's in an object. Let's say extra styles dot text, and I can have it in extra styles text, and that will have the same effect. You can see it with hot reloading. So the first step after, so that we don't have inline styling, is just to put it in objects like that. And we could put this in a different file and import it, but the pattern normally, and what they encourage, is to just have it, the component with this style in the same file. And then you can also, if it's an object like that, you can just get it and spread it, and then I can override it with something else. So not really. Never do live coding. No, this is like this. So we can get the object, spread it, and then override it. So kind of a CSS way of doing things. This is still an object, but what is the way to do it in React Native is to use a helper from React Native called stylesheet. You can just say stylesheet.create. And that gives some performance boosts for CSS. So when you saw the bridge bit of the architecture, when you use stylesheet.create, it does some internal optimizations with your CSS, with your styling. What happened? It's just, yeah. Thanks, Rory. So the next step after that is to use stylesheet.create. What that does is, instead of sending the object for styling across the bridge between the every time, is that it creates a reference by ID, it optimizes it, and you get a performance boost from that. Which is not really true, but the promise is that it will have performance boost in some point in the future. But once you do that, You cannot spread it like that because it's not an object anymore, but it allows you to have just an array, and you can still override it with using just passing an object. So you get an array, you can put your style from the style sheet create, and then you can override it with other stuff if you want. So this is the core of how you do styling. All the core components, which are like text and view, the stuff that you import from React Native itself, they have a style property which you can pass. You can pass a style object to it. You can pass an array of styles, like we said, and you should use style sheet.create. And then the cascading, which is one of those people that never liked CSS, but then when you do this, you appreciate CSS, that you just want a way to, for example, just change all text to look somehow, like you would do in an HTML page, just go and override body or something like that, and it cascades. But you don't have that concept in React Native. There is no cascading. All your text should be inside a component. I cannot just start writing text inside the view. There is a bit of style inheritance, but it's limited to text. So if I say style and just give it color red, then I have inside the text again that inner one, the text inside the other one will inherit the red, will still be red, and then I can give it other styles to make it bigger or something else. So there is this limited text inheritance, but there is no way to cascade. And this is the highlighted bit, is just from the React documentation. The way that they recommend is to use components, your own components. So even something like text, don't start by using, and we did that mistake in the application we built, don't import text and use it immediately. Just compose it in your own component that uses text, and that central component can be changed and reflected everywhere. So that's, for example, the button that we have for navigating here is using the React it's called navigation button. I could have used just the native button, but then if I decided to change that, since there is no CSS, there will be no way of doing it centrally. So instead, just always use your custom component, and in this case, this is just a simple functional component, and it returns a button and just applies some styles to it. But this means that if I decide to have a different way of styling this, or changing it from a button to something else, I can just change this component, and it reflects everywhere. So this is the way to get around not having CSS or some cascading in React Native. So this is the CSS as a cascade bit. And then the other side of this is layout. So we talked about styling, but then layout. And layout is very powerful in React Native. It uses this engine called Yoga. It's an open source layout engine and it relies on Flexbox with some differences from web Flexbox that are actually really good differences. So so one of the main differences is that Flexbox in web by default is direction is column, is it will align things horizontally, while in React Native, the default direction is to align things vertically. So I have this view here. If you see the top level, there is the top level view, and inside it, 3 components. And these components, because the top one has it's a flex has flex, then whatever is inside will be spread between it. I'll just put the borders around it to see these are the 3 boxes around in the container. And the container itself, it has flex direction column by default, so it doesn't make a difference to change that. But if it was row, then things will be spread on the horizontal axis. And this is flex direction is the first thing that we do. But then you have also align items, which align items, if your default flex direction is vertical, align items will align the items in the container in the cross axis. So since we are doing columns, now it aligned it in the horizontal one. So if I say flex end, it went for the end. If I say flex start, it will be in the start. Justify content will align the children along the main axis. So if I do this, then it will be spread to fill the space or space between. So it's very flexible. You can achieve any layout that you need to do with using Flexbox with these small changes, and it's extremely powerful. So here in the item list, I can sell it to, this is the item list to do in a row. Can use also flex wrap. And with these bits, you can do everything. And the nicest things actually, which will become clear in the next one, is that support for RTL, for right to left languages. If anyone have done right to left languages in web or in any platform, it's one of the most painful things to do. The app that we built was supposed to be in Arabic, but there are plenty of languages with that they are right to left. And right to left, I don't know if not just the flow of the wording is right to left. The whole layout is supposed to be right to left. And what the layout engine Yoga does is very simple and brilliant for these cases, is that we use flex start and flex end instead of left and right in CSS. And flex starts will map to left if you're in a left to right language. And if you flip to Arabic, Hebrew, or another language that's right to left, the same flex start will be just the other side. So it's very easy to do right to left. And I've done a lot of it in web and so on, and it was amazing how easy it was to just get that app to work on right to left. And then you can have, since we are doing JavaScript, the styling in JavaScript, you can have actual logic in these things. So you can have something like if language is RTL, then make it red. So if things that you can have that flexibility inside the logic of the code if you need it. And that's because of the Yoga engine. Even the gestures and animations, they are just by default, they will all go on the opposite side once you have it running. Not the opposite side, the right side, if you come from these countries. And that's RTL. So if I do this and refresh the app, and then you can see in this one, I have logic saying if is RTL do something. So if I want to change the text, normally in a real app will be, you can use like equivalent of a resource library. But the styling itself, I didn't do anything. The button for navigation, it just went to the other side, and the button to go back is going to the other side. So it all works because we just Yoga, the layout engine just handles that for you. So that's RTL. And then the last thing is to be able to do styling and layout is to have a way to do theming. So what if I want to just apply a theme for everything? And the pattern that people use to do that, and this is, I saw that from UI kits like native base and so on, is just to have a higher order component. So instead of using my components directly, it's just this higher order component called with theme, and this will return the component itself. And then in my router, this can be done in a better way, but the idea is just instead of returning my component, returning the higher order component, which returns the component itself after injecting some properties to it. So that makes the idea from that any component will be able to access the theme object from the properties. So the properties get propagated, and then you can get it in your components for free. So you can have a theme that's the white theme, and then if you change, there is a red one. Hot reloading didn't work in this case. Then this will pick, this is the only one that I have it hooked to the theme, but it will pick that theme. And it is simply an object. It's just that the higher order component makes it easier for us to get the properties to all components. And it can be taken a step further with the provider pattern. So in that case, instead of now I'm just fishing for theme, I can have something like, instead of just returning so this is the top level component, it can be wrapped in another components called some wrapper, and give it a theme here, and then everything else underneath can have access to that, which is just a pattern from React in general, not specific to React Native. So that's the way to do theming in general in React Native. And then there are UI kits to help with all of these things. Native base is the one I used in the previous project, and I wouldn't use again now that I know it. It's not good enough. But there is Shoutem it's recommended by a friend recently, and it gives some nice UI some components to use. So it's like Bootstrap, but for React Native. So a lot of components that look nice out of the box, navigation stuff and so on, and also a theming framework that you can do instead of doing your own thing, which relies on the same concepts. And it's very nice to just get something that looks nice very quickly out of the box with Shoutem. There is also React Native element, which I haven't used personally, but it's also one of the big UI kits for React Native. Other concerns for styling and so on are fonts and icons. If you're doing, so it depends on how you started your application. If you're doing it from just React Native, the native one, the original React Native, not CRNA, then you will need to do some building stuff. So if you're depending on the platform, on Android, to import and build some stuff in Java, for example, and so on. But things like CRNA and Expo, they have support for that out of the box. It becomes just as easy as just importing something as a require, and it works. But even with the native one, it's not hard at all to do it. And that's it. That's the talk, the end of the talk about styling in React Native. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Any questions?
So I have a question regarding the layouting.
Yeah.
Library, I think it was called Yoga. You're talking
Yeah.
about, yeah.
Mm.
So traditionally, obviously with CSS specifically, you've got different ways in which browsers interpret
Mm.
the CSS itself. Probably not iOS, but Android
Mm.
has the multiple different screen sizes and the versions.
Yeah.
Does React Native and Yoga specifically suffer from that?
Does it have the same concerns, or does that handle it internally?
It's what I saw so far in the application bit was just Android. It's abstracted from us. We didn't find any problems. And the thing that because it's JavaScript, the styling, you can have sometimes things like if device, you can have logic in your style, like if device's layout is landscape, then do something different. If it's bigger, the equivalent of breakpoints, it's very flexible from that point.
Oh, okay.
But as far as the layout itself, I didn't get any problems with Android. Yeah.
Okay. So they provide some manner of driving the layout through like some object, I'm guessing, built into React Native.
Yeah, so it doesn't use the browser at all for layout. It's not using the Chrome engine or any browser engine. It's a native layout engine that they built themselves, and so the only bit of React Native that uses the browser engine, that is the JavaScript engine, is for logic, but it's not for layout. So in that bridge, it will be bringing some logic, but the layout itself is native. So it could have its own bugs, but it's not the bugs that you would encounter in working in a browser in platforms. Yeah.
Thanks.
How do you handle navigation? Do you have like a navigation stack? Do you know what page comes before the page you're on? Or?
Yeah. So in the confusing part in the beginning, routing and navigation was a big issue. Until recently, I didn't know a good solution for doing that in React Native. And the problem was that React Native itself, it had two ways of handling routing and navigation. One of them was called experimental navigation, but it was the default one, and the default one was not used, so it was confusing. But now there is just a library called React Navigation. It seems to become the norm for navigation in React Native. And the thing about this, so if I look at app.js, you have a stack navigator, and you have three types of navigators out of the box from React, from that library. So stack one, a tabbed one, and the one that you get, the pane opening from the left or the right. Yeah. So you get this out of the box, and then you have routes. So for me to navigate to each one of these, you can say, you can augment the object saying the title of the page, and each one can say, this is my title basically, and this is what happens when you click next, and it's very customizable. You can do everything with that.
And if you want to go back to
you can override it as well. You have that. So with the stack one, it's a stack. Every screen builds on top of the other, and you can just go back. But you have other navigation ways as well, and you can customize pretty much everything.
See, on the layout side of things, does Yoga also have the equivalent of flex spaces? So you can have like different ratios for your flex items?
Yeah,
Yeah,
you can do that. Yeah, it's the same. Yeah, so you can do that. Yeah, you can just tell it, give it one, two, three, whatever, like it's relative. So it's like flex for web, except that the defaults are different.
Yeah.
So it's colon instead of that, and you have that flex start, flex end built into it.
Why is that though? Like, is there a reason why they cannot change that, or I don't know if you happen to know?
Because by default in mobile apps is when you have pens, you want them to like one on top of each other. That's more, that makes sense for mobile. While in web, you will have like typically, you know, 3 lanes, 3 panes or something. So, yeah.
So is there any missing CSS then?
Any
Missing CSS then?
No, like anything that you need from styling, you get there. So one of the things that, because you're using JavaScript, it just looks different. Like it has to be camel case instead of the CSS, like with the dash and so on. But everything, as far as I can tell, anything that that you need for styling is there.
So can you use, for example, like, you know, when you get like style components, which just use strings which are more close to CSS? Does that work, or you always have to?
I think there is a project to have that in React Native, but I haven't done that. No. Yeah.
Does that QR code that you can scan to debug your app on your phone, does that generate actually a native app on your phone as well, or?
So it uses. So this one is. I used Expo SDK this time, and this will be the equivalent on your mobile app, that you will get you'll get a tunnel to your application, and you can open it. It opens inside the Expo app, and then when you want to build it for the store or so on, then you can get rid of the Expo app and have a bundle that's
It's still native for.
It's native, yeah. It's native.
Okay.
So there is also the Expo. It has also its own IDE, XDE, and it's even an easier way of getting started. Like you have this, and you can just say start a new project and so on. For me, I found it very slow to run on the emulator. It works nicely on the phone, but and you can share over the internet if you'd like and so on. But I found it a bit slow on the emulator. It's okay with the iOS emulator, but it's slow with Android.
So see, on that, does that mean the application's actually built on your laptop and then it was the binary sent over the tunnel? Or
So it's a bridge bit. It has.
What I'm wondering is basically, can you use this to develop for iOS on, say, a Windows machine? Because if you've got it, okay, so it's probably built on the actual machine, right?
No.
That would be cool.
That would be cool. Yeah. I mean, they manage, because of this architecture. There is for iOS. What I found cool is that you can have. So I used Code Push, which is a service for updating your mobile application. So all the bits. Basically, if you don't have an update that requires linking a new native module, you can just update it on the fly, and your users will get the updated version. And that works on iOS as well, which is nice, because the process for going through the App Store is quite annoying. So, and that doesn't break the terms of services. Anything else? Cool. Cheers. Thank you, guys. A 10 minutes break, and then we'll start the next one.
So I'm going to be presenting a kind of a case study, really, of a project I've worked on recently about using engineering to improve conversion rates on our website. So I'm Daniel. That's me on Twitter. I leave that there genuinely because I'd love to connect, not because I think I'm a web celebrity or anything. You certainly ain't going to find any thought leading on my feed. And I work for a company called Wonderbly. I say I work for them, I'm leaving in 1 week, so this is kind of my swan song. But 4 years ago, I joined this group of people, and our first book, we make children's books, was to take the letters of a child's name and turn it into a magical story. So it went something like this, that a child one day wakes up having lost their name, goes on this magical adventure, and step by step meets all these different characters and finds the letters of their name, until eventually, lo and behold, having finished this adventure, they discover their name. And this was a huge hit. It was very, very exciting. We had, I think the first project I worked on was try and optimize the website ready for Dragon's Den. And we said, we will not go down. And we're one of the Dragon's Den candidates whose website did not go down during the show. So that was a huge moment for us. And then we decided we'd make the most expensive book ever made, which literally was read in space by Tim Peake. And then it all just started to pick up momentum after that very long and exhausting project of making that space book. Had a book about a child having their own kingdom, where all the things that they love was in it. Then a book about the littlest bear. It's for the youngest newborn child in a family. And this is a nice one because using personalization, we're able to create stories about any kind of family, any sort of structure of family, which is really cool, without having to kind of say, you're going to fit into this sort of shape. And then most recently, a collaboration with the Dahl Estate, a book about going into Willy Wonka's factory. So loads of exciting things technically going on. I think the person who wrote these special Wonka bars use some kind of machine learning for that. Seemed a bit overkill, but there's lots of fun tech going on. So my kind of part of this is to look after this website, and basically this means that the thing that I have to care about, apart from our users and all my colleagues, is conversion rate. Like getting that metric up, which says how likely is someone going to be to buy one of our books? So really, that's really kind of the role in e-commerce. And the mechanic we've had to increase conversion has typically been A/B testing, experimentation. Loads and loads of A/B tests. And I was kind of, to be honest, really sick of doing A/B tests. The designers are pretty tired of A/B tests, but it's a really important discipline because it allows you to validate using some kind of statistics that I don't understand, that one design or some kind of change that you're making on the website is not going to harm those important metrics such as conversion rate and overall revenue. So I was getting frustrated that this was kind of like our only tool that we had to do something technical and scientific to improve conversion. So I drafted an email to one of the founders and laid out what I thought was a very robust case to not just look at A/B testing as a means to improve conversion, but to look at improving site speed performance. So basically to make the web page run quicker. This seemed really obvious to me. It felt natural as a developer to care about writing code that was efficient and just creating a good experience for our customers. Seemed like a really obvious thing. But to get the business to give its limited resources into this project proved to be more difficult. So I looked at some research that various companies have done, big companies like Amazon and Walmart, and across the board, they all found that if they can improve site speed, they can improve conversion and their overall revenue. And I got this reply back from one of the founders who said, Perf will not deliver a 10% uplift in conversion. We believe different messaging, page flows, and flows will. You're probably not meant to copy emails from your founder into public presentations, but I'm leaving in a week, so. So I did what everyone naturally would do and got onto Twitter and set up a poll because I wasn't really happy with this email response that I wasn't going to be able to deliver my project, and asked Twitter what it thought, and we had a dead heat between A/B testing and optimizing page performance. So decided it was time to build a business case. This was the first time in my career that I had ever gone into sort of project manager land to try and convince people who decide where the money gets spent to spend it on the things that I want them to spend it. So it went a bit like this. So this is my strategy that I present to you today. Step 0, do an audit. And this is kind of what everyone does when they want to decide if they need to improve the site speed performance. There's lots of tools available. So this one with the film strip is from Chrome. And you can go into DevTools and hit the Audit tab, and then you can run an audit. And it uses a tool called Lighthouse, which is very, very good. And it shows you kind of incrementally as your page is loading how long it takes. Gives you some scores. So we were doing really badly with a score of 40 out of 100 on performance. Yet this didn't seem to convince anyone that it was an important enough project to really plow the resources into. This graph here and the letters at the top, that's another great tool called Web Page Test. You can just put your URL in for a website and it runs a synthetic test, measures how well the page is performing, lots of different factors. So overall, that wasn't looking fantastic, but it still wasn't a compelling case. This is my favorite test. Do a screenshot of your web page and convert it to a JPEG, and then compare it to how big the actual page is itself. So a JPEG of our homepage is 1.3 megabytes, but to download it over HTTP is 3.7 megabytes, 3 times the size. So I think if a JPEG of your web page is smaller than what your actual web page is, there's probably some room to optimize. Just a theory. This is from a tool called Catchpoint. It does something called synthetic monitoring, where basically robots will make synthetic requests to your web page from different places around the world. And it does this kind of on a frequent basis. Synthetic in the sense that it's attempting to give you a picture of what users around the world are seeing from your website. The really interesting thing here, so the color coding is, the blue is EU, and the green is North America, and the orange is Oceania, so Australia and New Zealand mostly. And there's a clear, and up on the vertical axes is how long the page is taking to load. So there's this clear downward or increased trend of users that are further away from Europe getting slower web pages. And this started to ring some alarm bells for me that maybe the experience we were having in the office wasn't exactly what our users around the world were experiencing. So us there with our high-tech devices and fast internet, we're thinking, oh, the website's super, super great and fast. But little did we know that there was someone in Australia on their old computer with rubbish processing power, or out in the sticks with a mobile phone or a tablet struggling to load one of our pages. So how do we deal with this? Here's a slide with a lot of text. In a nutshell, there are 2 ways of monitoring your web page performance. Synthetic testing, which I've mentioned, which attempts to give you a picture by sending requests to your web page from different computers around the world, or real user monitoring, where you actually collect the data on the user's browser and send it to some data collecting service of your own. This is really powerful because you're getting a massive sample size and your data represents exactly what your users are experiencing. So if you have a lot of users accessing your site on a mobile phone, that's going to be reflected in the data. And really importantly, it allows you to have some empathy with real users out there to see what they're actually experiencing, how long it's taking them to load your page. And you can tie that data to your conversion data, which means you can build a business case. I put this slide up because I felt like I'd made some progress building the slide deck at 5:20 p.m. this evening, and I wanted to celebrate. So that was my expression of that. So how to do this? This is pretty much the only bit of JavaScript in this talk. I didn't realize that until after I'd done this. So sorry, Glasgow JavaScript. There's if you Google MDM Performance Timing API, you can go into your console, type window.performance, and you get an object, and that object contains data of how long it took the page to load at different stages. So you'll get data points at these various different stages, from the initial request for a page through to how long DNS negotiation took, and how long it took for the response to start, and then how long it took for the response to end. And from that, you can extrapolate certain useful metrics. So for example, if you take response end and subtract response start, you can find out how long it took to download all the content of your web page. So we ended up with a bit of code that looks like this, where we kind of labeled certain timing. So say, how long does it take for the server to respond? That was from the request to begin and from the first byte to arrive. How long does it take for the page to download? And then with that data, we just sent it to Google Analytics, which we use for all that sort of analytics stuff. And from there, the folks who work in BI were able to do some analysis with that. That just gives you, you want to kind of record these ones quite soon. So some people will bounce when they arrive on your web page. And it's important you don't wait too long to capture their data, not their data, but their, how long it took for the site to load for them. Otherwise, you're going to get an incomplete picture. So it's ideal to be tracking performance metrics as soon as possible. Some take longer. So JavaScript bundle executing, that was one where I just said, okay, what's the time now at the point that our JavaScript bundle started to execute, and subtracted that, subtracted from that when the DOM started loading. So I had a rough estimate of how long it was taking our JavaScript bundle to load. That was really important because our JavaScript bundle is really big, and I wanted to build a case to say, if we can get the size of this down, this would be good for the business and for our customers. So these ones get tracked a little bit later once the page is kind of loaded a bit more. And once all this is set up, basically, just press record. Wait for that data to start going off to Google Analytics or wherever you're keeping your data, and sit back until you've got some stats. So step 2, analyze. We have a data warehouse at Wonderbly, and we push all the site speed data into that. Lots of other data goes into that warehouse, and I don't understand how it works. One of my colleagues, Florence Cluther, did the analysis, and if you have any questions about that, hit her on Twitter. It'd be really cool if at the end of this talk, Florence has 50 new Twitter followers, and we've kickstarted her Twitter presence. But I believe that they use a tool called Tableau, which allows you to plot data on fancy graphs, and I'll show you some of that now. So thanks to Florence for all of this stuff. This was her, and it's really cool. The first thing that Flo did was to just map out how many, just map out all the sessions that we were recording, and put them into groups. So along the horizontal line here, we have how long the page is taking to load, and then up on the vertical axis, we've got the number of people that were experiencing that. So you can see at the very quick page load times, we've got a small group of users who are, the page is loading very quickly. And then in this kind of middle area, most of the users are getting the page in between. So that's the sort of the light green, between 0.5 and 0.75 seconds, which seems pretty good to me. And we've got a few in the 0.75 to 1, and this kind of long tail of people who are getting the web page slower. At first glance, nothing looks concerning. Let's split it by device. So again, the colors represent how long the page is taking to load. We don't see much difference between devices. Tablet seems to have, for some reason, a lot of pages loading quickly. That's curious, but nothing of note really from splitting it by devices. As expected, you've got some slightly slower stuff on mobile, but not as much as I would have expected. Then we looked at pages. This was an interesting one because we found this page, the CMS variants page, had an incredible number of people getting the page very slowly. It's like 79% of users were getting this page in 1 to 2 seconds, which was much worse than other pages across the site. So that was a really great moment where this analysis enabled us to recognize basically a bug in the way we were caching data, that our cache was getting invalidated too quickly for that data, and we went and fixed that and improved the performance of that page. Then things started to get really interesting. So we split the performance by country, and if I can just highlight, if you look at all the countries that are outside of the EU, you see that there's a way more orange and red than the countries that are in the EU. So this was indicating that there was something problematic geographically going on here, and we needed to address that. You plot that in a graph, it really tells a picture. Everyone in the EU region are getting fast page loads, and people outside are getting very slow. Really concerning when the US is your biggest market. Wonder why? Well, here's a map of internet cables that run under the oceans and whatnot. And if you kind of think, what's the journey from our AWS EU West server to Australia? It's a pretty long journey that web page has to travel across real physical cables. So really, this was a problem of physics as much as anything else. Okay. The key question, how does this data tie into conversion rate? We took our biggest market, the US, and focused in on Facebook customers. If you look at this bottom row down here, you see that so conversion rates going up on the vertical axes. The slower the page took to load, the lower the conversion. There's a correlation between here. So at 2 to 5 seconds for a page to load, we're seeing a much lower conversion rate. And the difference between users that were, the page was taking 1 to 2 seconds to load between users who were getting it like half a second quicker, that's a 9% uplift in conversion. So I was starting to rub my fingers at that point, ready to reply to that email saying we wouldn't be able to deliver a 10% uplift in conversion from site speed performance. The real question was, is this correlation or is this causation? Is it that users with fast internet connections represent a wealthier demographic? Perhaps they're able to afford faster connections, better mobile contracts, better devices, and therefore they're seeing the page load quickly, and therefore because of their better wealth status, they're able to afford our expensive books? Or is it simply that when the page loads slow, people get frustrated and just give up more easily? So step 3 was to validate this, to find out whether it was correlation or causation. Back to my old friend, A/B testing. We ran a test, and these results are not from that test. I couldn't even find the results of this test. These are some random tests, but this is what it looked like. We ran a control, which was a page, one of the pages on the website, and then the variant of that page was that page running a bit quicker. I think we had changed something to do with caching on the back end, so we knew that the page would, the server would respond quicker, and we wanted to see if users that got given the quicker page would be more likely to purchase, whether their conversion rate would go up. As I say, these stats aren't from that, and we never quite managed to run that test through to statistical significance. So I'll say with a pinch of salt, we saw a trend which very closely matched what we saw in the previous plotting that the users who had the web page quicker were getting a much higher conversion, and it was significant. But I just caveat that we didn't quite reach statistical significance, so take that with a pinch of salt. So step 4 is to optimize, and ideally to use this data we've collected from users across the world to decide where we're going to focus our optimization efforts. Now, if you've got unlimited resources, you just optimize everything. But when you have limited resources, as most companies do, you have to focus in on something. And we knew that there was like a clear case that improving the time to first byte, so how long it takes the server to respond, and that HTML page to arrive at the user's browser, if we could improve that, we knew we could improve conversion. So we decided, of all the things, bundle splitting, image optimization, HTTP2, and so on, that we would focus on caching, being able to cache the HTML pages. And why? Again, undersea internet cables. We basically wanted to eliminate the journey through these undersea internet cables to the user's browser and be able to serve that page much more quickly. So this is kind of how it goes. The office in London, it makes a request to the server, that goes to Ireland, and it responds with a web page, and it happens pretty quickly, you know, like 0.3 of a second. Someone over in the States, it's got to travel through submarine internet cables and get back. The response time's like 0.7 seconds. So that journey is the problem, that distance. How do we get rid of that? The answer is to have a server in the States that keeps copies of the web page and serves it directly from there, eliminating the need for that round trip. Now, this is a tricky business because if you store something in your cache, let's say it's got some private data like someone's cart, and another user requests that, and the server, so the edge server here, delivers that cache page which contains someone else's data, then you've leaked personal information, and there's lots of things that can go wrong. So we knew this would be a difficult project. No one ever really wanted to do it in like the course of time I worked at the company, but at this point we realized that it would make a big difference, so we bravely decided we would have a go at coding at the edge. If anyone wants to like interrupt and ask any questions, feel free. You can guide this as much. I'm going to do an overview of how we approach this. It's kind of sparse, but if you are interested in more detail, then just feel free to ask. So the server that we saw on the map sitting in the States is known as a CDN, a content delivery network. So it's a network of servers that can deliver things like image assets and even HTML pages from servers that are located closer to the users. So say a user makes a request to products page, that is received by the CDN. And the CDN will then pass that request onto the server. Now, because one of the things that can cause the website to change is the language that the website is in, so it might be EN, it might be ENGB, it might be ES or German or so on. The CDN will also add to the request the language that the page should be served in. And it does that by checking the accept language header that's set on the user's browser and other factors, like if a user specifically selected one has a cooking be set and so on. So this request goes to the server. The server says, okay, here's a page in ENGB, and it returns a response with some cache control headers. Now the cache control headers, so this header here, cache control, this is funny. I thought that wasn't working. That one's received by the user's browser, but the surrogate control header is received by the CDN. So we really want to make sure that we never cache anything on the user's browser, because if you do that and you get it wrong, you can never delete it other than to go to the user's laptop and clear cache. So that's a situation you never want to go in. I did threaten my boss that I was going to leave a picture of my face on the web page and set cache control headers as a goodbye present. So yeah, we use surrogate control headers instead, and the surrogate is the CDN. And we say to the CDN, the server says to the CDN, I want you to cache this page for like 5 minutes or something like that. And then very importantly, it includes another header, the vary header, which says this page will vary. It can change depending on the normalized lang header. So you can provide a list of headers in the request that can affect the response. And that means that the CDN will not cache just by the URL, but it also cache based on certain headers that were in the request. And that means that we're not going to send an English version of the web page to someone who's requesting a Spanish version. There are different ways to configure CDNs. You might have heard of Lambda at Edge, which is an AWS product. That allows you to write this kind of logic in JavaScript, which I would have loved to have done. I think it might have made things a fair bit simpler, but we already were using Varnish caching language, which is a domain-specific language specifically for caching on CDNs, and we decided we would kind of keep with that. It's a C-like language, and we were using a service called Fastly, which has got certain extensions, so allowing you to get a normalized language based on various factors. So it looks like that on the CDN, and then we have using Express.js, we just set a vary header whenever that page is served to say this page is going to vary depending on the language header. Then back to A/B testing again. In an e-commerce business, there's no getting away from the fact that you're going to be constantly running A/B tests. So here's the most complicated thing that your page could vary by. And it meant that rather than deciding how a user would be bucketed into various experiments on the server, we had to do that on the edge servers. So if you Google VCL pre-flight request, or if you saw on the previous slide, how to solve anything with VCL, which is a really great talk by Andrew Betts, one of the ways of doing this is to do something called like rerouting your request on the CDN to somewhere else to get some data, and then once you've got that data to finally pass the request back onto the server. So on the first, so the CDN initially receives the request for the products page, and then rather than going to the server to ask for the products page, it goes to the server and asks, what features should this user get? And then the server responds with a list of features that users should be bucketed into. So they've got a response header called flags, and it's saying we've got an A/B experiment 1 with this control, and a feature 2 is flagged on. And then once that's received, the CDN then reroutes the request back to the server, this time to request the products page, and includes the data from the pre-flight request to include which flags the page should have. And then finally, the server responds with the page, taking into account the various experiments and features that the user should have turned on, and it includes a vary header, of course, to say this response is going to vary depending on the flags header. So that was a pretty like mind-blowing technique that we discovered from Financial Times, who had developed or who had shared that, and that seemed really cool. But I was still a little bit concerned that you're still making a request to the server to get that feature data. So how do you mitigate that? Well, this can be cached, that first request as well. So you can cache the response from the server with the products page, but you can also cache the pre-flight request, which means it only needs to make that request once. Still, I thought we could do better. So I set up some code to upload a dictionary, a kind of a lookup table with all the possible feature flags a user could be bucketed into. Now you laugh, but this works really, really well. And then And now our request-response cycle only has one request to the server because the CDN already is able to look up which flags are enabled for a certain user. There's a bit of trickery going on here. Rather than using unique IDs for users to decide how they should be bucketed into different groups, we just have a range of groups that users can be bucketed into from 0 to 1,000 or to 999, and then we do a table lookup based on the group that we placed them into. I was concerned whether this function, random string, would provide us a consistent distribution, which is very important when you're doing A/B testing. We ran it, and it's fine. It works really well. Underlying is a Unix function, which is really designed not for actual randomness, but for pseudo-randomness, which gives you a kind of a fairly decent distribution once you reach the size of the number of people that are going into that group. Phew. Yeah, so in summary, do an audit, see kind of like how you're doing. You'll do the audit and you'll wonder, should I have a score of 70? Should I have a score of 80? Should I have a score of 90? You don't really know, it's all relative. So start recording user metrics. So you can Google RUM, real user monitoring, get that data, analyze it, see how it impacts the metrics that are important to your organization or business, whether that's conversion rate or engagement or something else. Validate whether this has an impact in real life. Then focus your optimizations accordingly. And finally, profit. That's an awful word to end on. So sorry about that. If you want to follow me, I'll be walking out the door. But also on Twitter, DJGrant_, and thanks. Does anyone have any questions? Yes?
When you started doing the tests, did you already have the load balancing servers in the States and Australia, or you added them later?
So we were using Fastly, the CDN. So all our, since, I don't know, 2013, all requests to the website go via CDNs provided by a company called Fastly. But we weren't caching any of the HTML pages. So we're caching things like image assets and CSS and JavaScript. But all Fastly was doing was receiving a request, and then once it had got it, saying, okay, now go to the server and get that HTML page. So it was still doing the journey.
But you had it in the States and not Australia?
Those CDNs are around the globe. I'm not sure exactly all the locations.
What do you think was the reason why there was such a difference between Australia?
Just because Australia's further away, basically. So the distance a request and a response has to go to the States is under the Atlantic Ocean, and the cabling is fairly straightforward. There's a cable that just runs from the UK to the States. For Australia, it goes through lots of different countries. So it's like, getting on like a bus to Pollock Shields and then walking to Shields Road and getting the subway to.
No, it's actually on the same topic. There is actually a really good book by Ilya Grigorik, I think. It's called High Performance Browser Networking. It explains all of those things about it's easiest to optimize just by simply moving your servers closer.
Yeah.
It's the best thing. It's pretty much the problem is because TCP goes back and forth 3 times. So it's not only goes to Australia once, it goes 3 times to actually establish the connection.
Yeah.
As the HTTPS, it's another 2 times. So it's a lot of going on back and forth.
Yeah.
Did it improve conversion rate?
To be continued is really the story. So we're rolling out caching at the moment. I don't know if I'll be around to see the stats, but I'm pretty confident. I mean, when we looked at this data and we said, okay, if we can turn this into an actual change in conversion, the value is huge in terms of actual money it was going to make for the business. Obviously, you know, we care about value to the user, that they're not using up all their mobile data plan and that they get to have a more enjoyable experience. But a 9% uplift would have been a really significant amount of money. So I'm watching, waiting to see.
You mentioned CDN you were using Fastly.
Yeah.
Why didn't you use AWS? Because all your data is stored, as I understand, with AWS. So why using another content delivery network?
Yeah, so I would love to have used AWS because we would have been writing JavaScript.
Everything would be in the same center, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the benefits are of having everything in the same center or not. I mean, the server would still be in Ireland, and then there'll be other servers around the world that route the requests. The reason we chose not to was we already had Fastly, and we had a lot of logic in our Fastly setup that we just didn't want to slow this project down by having to migrate all of that. Also, Lambda Edge is in beta, so people have to kind of gain confidence in a service and feel that it's not going to present a risk to the business.
Did you use the AWS database? Did you use what kind of database were you using for your books, for your?
We're using Postgres, which is hosted on AWS.
But nothing with no SQL or anything like it?
No. Not for e-commerce anyway.
Okay.
So,
For A/B testing, is this something that you built yourself, or you use something like
right, A/B testing. Do you want the short answer for the long answer? We've used Optimizely for a long time, and generally when people use Optimizely, they put the browser JavaScript snippet on their page, and then they'll design their experiment using Optimizely's WYSIWYG, or what you see is what you get tool. And what that does is it waits for your page to load, and then using jQuery it changes things on the page. If you're using React.js, it's a nightmare because it's like two things are fighting against each other. Optimizely tries to change the page, and then React changes it, and then it's a terrible idea. So after grappling with that for a while, we found that Optimizely had a product called Full Stack, where you can do the bucketing of users on the server. You could actually write this code yourself. You basically take a user ID and then put it into kind of a hash table, and you end up with all your users on a line from like 1 to 10,000, and you'll say everyone from 0 to 5,000 are going to be in the control group, and everyone in 5,000 to 10,000 will belong to like the variant group. So how it works is could be written yourself. It's not like rocket science. And Optimizely have an open source package that does all that, and it's called Optimizely Node SDK, I think. So I used that, and then rather than paying for the full stack product, sorry Optimizely, if you're watching, we just decided that we would let the browser snippet know how a user would be bucketed, and you use that using a page event. If anyone's using Optimizely, come and have a chat to me. I can talk to you about how to save £100,000 on a really overpriced service. So that's what we're using for that. So basically, server side, figure out where a user's bucketed, then deliver the variation depending on that. Is that kind of possible? Yeah.
Just curious, what kind of security considerations do you guys have to think about? I'm just thinking, like, could a user theoretically trick the CDN to get and retrieve a cached version of some other user? Like, was there a way, was that a possibility, or did you guys have to consider security in that sense?
I don't think there's any vulnerabilities that don't exist already. Like the risk, as I mentioned, is that what you really want to avoid if you're setting this up is allowing developers to, say, set a cookie on the server that's used for some logic, and then that breaks all the caching, and so people start getting like pages that were intended for someone else. So it's really important to set up some integration testing to say, when I make a given request, will I always get back the same response, and will it include the correct vary headers to let the CDN know? I don't think there's, I mean, we can, yeah. Do you have a specific like example in mind?
No, it was just, I remember when you had that slide up, I think this was like what Financial Times were doing. They were doing another request to get the vary headers,
Okay,
the control flags and things like that. I remember, I noticed it had like a user ID. Yeah, I was just thinking like, you know, I mean, I don't know how that request is mapped from like the users and then show HTTP request. But I was just wondering, is there possible kind of, not a flaw, but just like kind of need to take security into mind when you...
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I think it's the same concerns as if you didn't have the CDN. There's a really good post, I think it's the what I mentioned, how to do anything in VCL part 3, or maybe part 2. And they talk about how they decode JSON web tokens on the CDN. So if that's an area of interest, that's like super fascinating, how to decode JSON web token. We're not doing that, but yeah. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
That's it, guys. Thank you. Yes, actually we have 2 talks for next time. We feedback possibly, like if you think we should have a third talk
or not. We tried that in React Edinburgh, and then we ran out of talks very quickly. So maybe it's better to keep it at 2 talks, but guarantee that it goes on, or the level of the talks themselves. But for next time, I think Tom is having a talk about. Yeah. Yeah, and Rarish about reactive.
Yeah, RxJS and asynchronous JavaScript.
Yeah, so at least next month we know that there is a meetup for sure. Thank you guys, and take the flyers about Code Your Future. Hopefully some of you get in touch. Cheers. Thank you.